Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Williams, and I'm a senior manager on the core team. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Drilling Down on Digital Dental Payments. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone of a few logistics. First, this webinar is being recorded. All attendees and registrants will receive a link to a copy of the recording and the slides in the next 1 to 2 business days. And while your microphone will be muted, we do encourage you to submit any questions you have throughout the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the webinar. Moving on to the agenda, we're going to start today with an electronic payments introduction. Then we'll move on to CORE's covering of the EFT and ERA operating rules. Lassie will cover streamlining electronic payments. We'll have time for questions and then a brief call to action. I'll now turn it over to the speakers to introduce themselves, starting with Stijn Pelle with Lassie. Stijn?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar today. My name is Stijn Pelle. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lassie. And we've helped thousands of independent providers across the country make that transition from paper payments to electronic payments. And helped install software to make that reconciliation of these payments a lot easier and a lot less dependent on the teams in those practices. So far, that then translated into millions of dollars that are now no longer processed manually, but go directly in the bank accounts of the providers, and the ERAs end up directly into the practice management systems that the businesses run on. Before I started Lassie, a little bit about me. I spent 10 years building software in financial technology and healthcare, software now used by millions of people every day. And I got into digital healthcare myself, thanks to my own dentist, who's on the call with us today, Dr. Kwan from Menlo Park, California. He showed me how he ran his finances, mainly, and we will hear that in a minute, done on paper and processed by his team. In fact, I took a 9 to 5 in his practice because I couldn't really believe that all of that still happens on paper. And I'm very excited to help accelerate this digitization process for all of you. Dr. Kwan, why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, my name is Eric Kwan, and I'm a dentist from Menlo Park, California in the Bay Area. And I started my practice about 9 years ago, around the time that Stijn immigrated to Palo Alto from the Netherlands.
And then Taha, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Taha Antarwala. I'm with CAQH, been with the organization for 10 years, and I oversee a lot of our operating rule development initiatives. So working with our participating organizations, identifying what are the key opportunities and pain points across the revenue cycle that could see value and improvement through the development and implementation of business rules. And then as we work with our stakeholders to develop these business rules, I also oversee our certification and testing program to support organizations embed these rules into their systems, into their policies, into their process, and certify that that they've implemented all these rules and standards that they support correctly.
Thanks so much, Taha.
All right, so I guess I'll kind of level set with everyone and talk about electronic payments and the value that they provide to the industry, and why are we here today. So on the next slide, Sarah, I'd like to just maybe start off by defining some basic key terms. Our industry is full of acronyms, EFTs, ERAs. You'll be hearing that thrown out on the webinar today. So I thought, let's just start with the basics. So first we have, when we think about payments, electronic fund transfers, or EFT, which is essentially direct electronic transfers of funds from a health plan to a provider's bank account. Think of this as maybe a direct deposit you may get from your employer to your bank as you get paid for your work. And really, this method really replaces paper checks, significantly reducing delays and errors in payment processes. Next, there's the electronic remittance advice, or ERA, which serves as an electronic version of an explanation of benefits. So think of ERAs really provide detailed information on how and why a claim was paid, helping providers reconcile their accounts efficiently. These transactions rely on the automated clearinghouse network, which is really the backbone of how electronic payments in the US are handled, including direct deposits, direct payments from nearly every bank and credit union in this country. So on the next slide, I'd like to explore the journey of an electronic payment by walking through a workflow. So it all starts with claim processing. So when your provider submits a claim to a health plan, once the claim is processed and adjudicated by the health plan then initiates an EFT transaction to transfer the payment electronically into the provider's bank account. And in parallel, the electronic remittance advice is also generated, which details those specific details about a payment. This workflow involves several key players, including vendors who facilitate the transaction, banks that handle the actual transfer of funds, and the providers who receive payment. And along this workflow, the use of industry standards are specifically used. And for the electronic funds transfer, there's the EFT, CCD plus TRN standard. And then for the electronic remittance advice, it's the X12835 standard that's used to ensure that every step is consistent, efficient, and secure. By standardizing these transactions, the goal here is to minimize errors, reduce manual processing, and really improve the speed in which providers receive their payments. On the next slide, I'd like to just give a brief, one more slide, brief introduction of CORE, kind of who we are and the value that we bring to the industry, and specifically hone in on electronic payments. So CORE is really a key player in supporting industry transition to electronic payments. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to streamlining the exchange of healthcare information. We publish operating rules, and our operating rules really help ensure that everyone is on the same page, that the transfer of this data is uniform when it comes to electronic transactions, ensuring that the process is much smoother and efficient. We are federally designated by the Department of Health and Human Services to create operating rules that reduce administrative burden across the industry. And we have over 100 different organizations that participate in our work efforts, allowing us to be a trusted and independent entity that really convenes and brings stakeholders together to address problems and come up with solutions and best practices in a uniform way. And our work isn't just about developing operating rules and setting best practices. It's also about saving the industry significant costs. And you looking at the number of the site, $18.3 billion is the estimated cost savings that could be facilitated through industry transitioning from manual processes to automated transactions, as estimated by our. On the next slide, I'd like to dive into some of the index data to really highlight, where these opportunity areas present. So the CAQH Index, which is an annual report that CAQH publishes every year, tracks the adoption of electronic transactions in the healthcare industry. And as of 2023, we've seen steady progress, with 21% of claim payments being fully electronic in the dental marketplace via ACH EFTs. However, there's a notable portion, 79%, that's handled manually through partially electronic methods like web portals and IVR systems. The dental industry particularly stands in great benefit to switch from fully electronic transactions in terms of claim payment and remittance. We can see an estimated of $279 million annually for the payment, and then the remittance, the savings are even higher, $314 million annually. So those are some staggering numbers that showcase, the benefits and the cost savings to going to more electronic processes. And these savings really come from reducing paper-based transaction, minimizing manual data entry, and eliminating inefficiencies in the payment processes. For instance, by fully adopting electronic transactions, a small provider could reduce time spent on administrative tasks, freeing up more time for patient care. Similarly, a large health plan could significantly cut costs by eliminating paper checks and automating their payment processes. So there's savings on both sides of the spectrum, and we'll hear more from our guest speakers today on those process improvements that could come about. On the next slide, I'd like to do a deep dive on our payment and remittance operating rules that are really designed to ensure smooth and efficient processing of healthcare payments. These set of rules are federally mandated, with the exception of our acknowledgement requirements, and cover both infrastructure and data content aspects of the payment and transaction information exchange. So starting with our infrastructure rules, these rules really ensure that the necessary systems and processes are in place to handle EFT ERA transactions. So think of this as requirements for ensuring that the data transmission is secure, all your systems are available, and if they go down, ensuring that providers are notified. So that way, when they're sending transactions, it's not just going, not going into a black hole. And processing timelines. For example, one of our rule requirements specifies that when an electronic payment is sent, the remittance advice should be sent within 3 days of each other to ensure timely matching between the two transactions, to ensure that a provider can really reassociate the details of the claim payment with the claim adjustment and denial reasons. Without this rule, providers might be, may receive a payment, but have difficulty in determining which claims the payment is for, really leading to confusion and delays in the processing. And then we have another group of rules called data content rules. These rules really standardize the information exchange during the EFT and ERA transaction. And a crucial part of these rules involves the use of standardized codes like CARCs and RARCs, the claim adjustment reason codes, to really explain the adjustments or denials on the remittance advice. Next slide, please. So let's talk about our core EFT ERA enrollment data rules, which are really designed to standardize the process by which providers enroll to receive electronic payments and remittance advice. Again, this is the first step a provider needs to do to start receiving payments and remittance electronically. So in 2024, earlier this year, we published an updated set of these rules to really align with the evolving needs of the industry. And several improvements that I'll be discussing. So one improvement is that we externalized the enrollment data sets, which kind of allow greater flexibility and alignment with current emerging business needs. So that way we pulled these data sets outside the rule to be better adaptable, and we can update these and modernize these over time as industry needs change. We've also added support for bulk enrollment. So making it easier for larger organizations to enroll multiple providers at once. So if you're a group practice or a large health system, the ability to manage multiple providers and ensuring that those providers are able to receive payments electronically is another key addition that we've had. Our industry is definitely focused on security, and security was one of the major focus of these updates. With the mass fraud going on, cyber attacks, we want to make sure the payment and remittance of data is safe and secure, and also your bank account details as you're enrolling. So we've introduced fraud detection measures into the rule to safeguard enrollment data, ensuring that any sensitive information is protected throughout the process. For example, we've recommended the use of multi-factor authentication as part of this enrollment process to further enhance security. Additionally, we've established clear notification and timeframe requirements, so ensuring that providers are consistently informed about their enrollment status. And when a provider is whether it's a new enrollment or update to your bank details, we want to make sure the provider knows what the status is, and we have designated certain timelines. Within 2 weeks, a provider should be enrolled into a health plan. So it really tightening that window. Additionally, with the updated rules, health plans also are now required to provide clear upfront disclosure of any sort of fees that they might recur as part of the enrollment. So this transparency allows providers to make informed decisions about their payment methods and really eliminate any surprises when they receive their payment. So this is potentially one of the barriers that we've heard, and we've tried to address this through these fee disclosure requirements. Additionally, in response to a growing complexity of healthcare payments, we've also expanded our rules to include provisions for alternative payment methods. So while we recognize EFT remains a primary method for electronic payments, providers now have the option to easily opt in or opt out of other electronic payment methods to really align with their business needs. So all this to say, these updates really support a greater method of transparency to foster trust and encourage more providers to adopt electronic payments. I really, walk through that index data on the previous slide, really trying to push the needle forward and drive more adoption of these electronic payments. On the next slide, I'd just like to wrap up kind of the value of what the EFT and operating rules bring to the healthcare industry. First and foremost, these rules really improve cash flow by ensuring that these payments are processed quickly and accurately. They eliminate the need for manual rekeying of payment data, reducing errors and saving time. The ability to standardize enrollment is another significant benefit, creating a consistent and efficient process for providers to enroll across multiple different health plans. So if you're a provider and you're in a network with 20 different health plans, having one single enrollment form or data set to mass enroll is really beneficial and valuable. Additionally, the automation of EFT and ERA reassociate ensures payment remittance advice can be easily matched to help support payment posting and into your accounting systems, further reducing administrative burden on providers. And overall, the EFT and ERA operating rules really support increased transparency, ensuring that providers and plans are informed every step of the way. So hopefully not only enhancing the provider experience and patient experience, but also strengthening the financial stability of the healthcare system. So with that, just wanted to provide a level set of the EFT ERA enrollment rules, and I'd like to hand it over to Stein and Dr. Kwon to review their portion.
Thank you, Taha, for that thorough overview and setting the foundation. Also pretty exciting to see all the updates that are coming up that will definitely further accelerate like this transition. So excited to see these rules come into effect. Dr. Kwon, why don't you share your story about your transition going from, in your case, literally a sea of paper to digitized payments and systems? Oh, I think you have to unmute yourself, Dr. Kwon. We currently can't hear you.
Thank you. Like Stein mentioned, it became apparent to me that dental payments were quite antiquated, even in the heart of Silicon Valley. Ironically, in the Valley of Technology, our practice was drowning in a sea of paper. This realization was pretty painful. My practice was rapidly growing to over 150 new patients every month, and coupled with some staffing issues, I unfortunately fell behind $1 million on outstanding insurance accounts receivable. To keep up, I had no choice but to start manually entering these insurance EOBs into Dentrix, my practice management software myself. It was driving me crazy. Take a $50,000 check from Delta Dental, for example. It took me 6 hours just to enter it procedure code by procedure code. There were hundreds of them. It was quite disheartening. Instead of spending quality time with my patients, my team and I were spending countless hours every week on manual data entry.
Thanks for sharing that story, Dr. Kwon. On the next slide, it sounds like you were running a thriving practice in Menlo Park, right? All your payments came in on paper checks for the most part, and then you unfortunately were in a situation that you yourself had to step in to manually cash these paper checks into the bank account, and then these EOBs you received on paper, you spent many hours keying them into, in your case, Dentrix, your practice management system, and that was the state of affairs a couple of years ago. Is that a good summary of the situation that you're in?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're spot on.
Yeah, you're obviously not alone in this. I think the stat that stuck with me, Taha, was the 79% of dental insurance payments that are fully manually processed, even as of today, which means that many people like Dr. Kwon and many providers like Dr. Kwon mainly get paid by mail or email and manually have to process these payments. So indeed, a multi-billion-dollar cost-saving opportunity for both providers and payers. And if we accelerate that transition, obviously, a lot of patients will benefit from a streamlined revenue cycle. Next slide, because the situation that Dr. Kwon described for us, where payments come in manually, needing to be touched by his team, an average, I believe you told me, of 5 minutes, right, per patient. Yes. That it took you to do the admin work. That reminded me a little bit of the pre-digital state, if you will, of other industries that have made this transition. Take, for example, cash. Most transitions nowadays are digital. And I even believe that the Fed estimates that about 80% of all consumer transactions now happen electronically. The same goes for paychecks, obviously. There was indeed a world where workers were paid on paper paychecks. Now that is 90% that gets paid via direct deposit, which almost seems unfeasible a few decades ago. And for me personally, as a technologist, it's pretty exciting to see that the same is happening in healthcare payments, where we literally have the opportunity to move an industry that gets paid for 79% on paper and make that transition to EFTs and ERAs. But maybe Dr. Kwan, it's good to hear from you again about like what that transition looked like from, let's say, the sea of paper, right? That like you just talked about, to the digital payments that you now like have up and running in your practice, and the automated systems that help you process all these payments in your practice.
Absolutely. Next slide. So speaking of 90% of EOB posting and insurance payment reconciliation has now been digitized and automated in my practice. Things look very different these days. Instead of dealing with paper insurance checks, we've enrolled in direct deposits that go straight into my bank account in just a matter of days. There's now very little manual data entry of EOBs into Dentrix as digital payments came to the rescue. This means faster deposits, more consistency, and more accuracy. It significantly reduces outstanding accounts receivable. And of course, I'm no longer $1 million behind in AR because software is reconciling these payments for me and my team. Next slide. The first step we took was enrolling the office in digital payments. Lassie figured out how to route insurance payments directly into my bank account and how to receive digital EOBs, known as ERAs, as Taha mentioned, for my major dental insurance companies. For now, payments are coming in electronically. This laid the foundation to automate the posting of insurance payments. As you might have noticed, not all insurances provide reliable ERA and EFT options yet. Next slide. Now the money goes straight into my bank account and the EOBs are automatically posted to all patient ledgers using software. The software even handles write-offs and provides notes on procedure note denials accurately assigned to the correct provider. It also links with my bank account to check if everything in the PMS matches my bank, a task that would normally take my team countless hours every week. Next slide. It's also much easier to manage denials and unreconciled payments. We now have a smart, automatically generated list of follow-up action items. What claims need to be appealed, who has secondary insurances on file, what patients need to be billed. This all allows for us to close our books even more quickly. In general, there are just fewer sticky notes, fewer envelopes, less searching for missing payments, which saves time for everyone and lowers our error rate as well.
Thanks for sharing that story, Dr. Kwan. I do remember walking into your office, literally stacks of paper on your desk, right? That has to be processed. We're talking hundreds of pages every week and tens of checks.
Yes.
To like now 95% of your payments directly going into your bank account. And it looks like software like fully automatically reconciling these payments in your PMS, like with all the notes and the write-offs, as well as checking against your bank account programmatically if these payments actually like happened. And then it sounds like you've set up a workflow tool, right, where no appeals or patient statements slip through the cracks, because like software is basically telling you after all these ERAs and EFTs are processed and reconciled across your systems, which claims need work, and with the time freed up, like your team has time to follow up like on that. Maybe that is a good segue into like you've been doing this for a couple of years right now, right? I think you made this transition about like 3 years ago. Like what benefits have you seen over the years from moving to EFTs and ERAs, and then like software like Lassie processing these payments for you and creating like these follow-up tasks?
Yes. First and foremost, it has saved us time to focus on the patient experience and growth opportunities. By creating a margin of time, automatically direct depositing and posting has created a margin of time. And this time spent on the patient experience includes enhancing in-office service. And instead of my admin team multitasking in front of patients, they're able to truly engage and focus on the patients. Also, it allows me personally to regularly spend time with my providers to calibrate and coach them to our standards. Also, in terms of bringing in more revenue via treatment plans and allowing our admin team to focus on following up with patients and optimizing fee schedules, essentially allowing my team to act as true COO and CFO of my practice. There's also no need to hire additional staff members and team members as our practice scales. Secondly, it's been more reliable and accurate, virtually eliminating the risk of human error and embezzlement. And lastly, it's accelerated cash flow 4 times from over 4 weeks to less than a week. That means that we can bill patients more quickly, and our patients remember what the patient rendered was, and they're inclined to pay more quickly as well, thereby lowering my AR further.
That's amazing, Dr. Kwan. I mean, that's, I think, why we're all here together, or like work so hard making this transition for you, that all of a sudden there's 80 hours like freed up every month in administration work for you. And I know you have been able to see a lot more patients as a result of that, like over the past years, and serve your community. So that is really wonderful, while you're getting paid faster and feel that you actually like collect more as a result of that. That is wonderful. So if you go to the next slide, like something that I get asked quite often by working with practices like Dr. Kwan and thousands of other providers at this point in time across the country, making that transition, like where do I think this is going, especially coming from the world of Silicon Valley, now being active in the dentistry like field. What do I think is possible in 5 years from now? And I think, like, first of all, we have to admit we're just getting started, right? So I think what CAQH like points out well is we're at the beginning of that journey where the industry is still for 79% like on paper or fully manual. So like I would say, like, we will see where the future exactly ends in a couple of years from now. But I think we can learn some lessons from other industries that went through this transition, like cash and paychecks, as well as like some observations from like these thousands of providers that have made this transition already. Mainly 3 things that I think will happen in the coming, like, let's say 5 years from now. The first one, like after working with Dr. Kwan, is that I think in 5 years from now, it will take a provider like Dr. Kwan maybe just a couple of hours to like run the practice every month. Instead of, I think approximately like it took you 200 hours a month, Dr. Kwan, right? To like run the insurance reconciliation, the patient billing, the payroll, and all these like things. And that will go down to about a couple of hours every month. And that's mainly due to like further automation and digitization of the things that we talked about. So the insurance payments processing, the EOB posting, the reconciliation. But the same automation will come to patient billing, to appeals management, where on top of this automation, we can train AI systems to like make that process streamlined. Payroll can be like partly like automated as a result of these payments now electronically being processed. Accounting, bill pay. So thanks to digitization and automation of all these jobs to be done that now happen manually for Dr. Kwan and other providers, we can cut that down to a handful of hours. Like similar things happened in other industries that went to the same transition. So that's one. I think the second thing is that as a result of this transition, the human error rate like will be almost completely eliminated. I think it's estimated that it's currently about 5 to 10% like error rate in the processing of all these payments, and that will come down like significantly as a result of like further automation. The same will happen with embezzlement. It will simply be a lot harder to commit fraud with payments that go directly into the provider's bank account. And the reconciliation being done by software, right? Like where software checks if payments come into a bank account, that match what's in the practice management system and is sent by the payers. Cash flow will also speed up significantly. I think we saw a good example with Dr. Kwan of literally Dr. Kwan, I believe he said 4 times faster, right? Between you doing a treatment and then receiving the payments. And I think we will, across the board, see payments not like linger for 60, 90, 120 days or get pretty far behind because people need to process that, but like never be behind and payments being processed within days. Like something I've observed across practices is that between the date of service and the payment in the bank account and being reconciled by software, the status quo with software is getting close to multiple business days, which is very promising to see. Lastly, not only do I think it will be a couple of hours to run the practice, it will speed up cash flow significantly, reduce embezzlement, and eliminate the error rate. I think as a result of all these things, a lot more providers will find it easier to manage their practice, and as a result of that, will remain independent, which, like research shows, is ultimately best for patients when a doctor or provider has agency. What I suspect is that a lot more practices will remain independent as a result of the work that we're doing here together. All right. With that, I think we've discussed like what the current state of affairs is. 79% of the payments processed manually. I think thanks to Dr. Kwan sharing your story, know like what is currently possible, right? In 2024, like get to 90%. Payments like digitally processed, have software reconcile all these payments. So the job to be done of doing your accounts receivables and EOB posting and reconciliation is just like a lot like faster and simpler. And we talked a little bit about what's to come as a result of updated rules and us like working hard to build the software processing these payments like for providers. Let's go over a few questions that like we've received, and feel free to use the Q&A button in this Zoom call as well if you have more questions, like for Dr. Kwan or for CAQH or myself. But let's go over 4 that like we got in. Maybe first start about the enrollment process, Dr. Kwan. Like that is a tedious and time-consuming like process. Like, what are your experiences? What have your experiences been over the years with that?
Yes. Yes, it is tedious, and that's why I held off on this for such a long time. The EFT and ERA enrollment processes are not standardized across the payers, and it would have taken my team many hours to complete. Lassie took care of all that, and when they onboarded us, it's something they've now done thousands of times, and they really figured out the most efficient workflow here.
Yep. That makes sense. It's for you simply as a provider, a lot of work, an independent provider to do this by yourself. And indeed, like if you work with a software provider like us, like we took care of that EFT and ERA enrollment, and set that up like for you. Okay, another question, if we click to the next slide, is that enrollments like cost money. Like what are your experiences with that?
Yes. That was unclear to me as well when I tried doing it myself. It's quite complicated, and many partners do appear to charge for it. However, Lassie actually figured out that it is possible to set up free EFTs for most payers. There are some exceptions, of course, payers for whom there's no workaround, no way around paying for EFT infrastructure. We shouldn't need to pay to get paid.
Yep. That is a fair point, especially with ACH infrastructure. Interesting to kind of like further explore that together. All right, then let's talk about the reconciliation process of these ERAs and these EFTs, right? Because like, okay, we have set up the ERAs and EFTs to come in and then train software to like make an interpretation of these ERAs such that they can be reconciled and directly posted into your practice management system and then reconciled against your bank account. So like what has the quality like been, or your experiences like with now software doing that instead of your team members like doing that work?
Yes, for me, that was pretty simple. My baseline error rate with people doing it hovered around 5 to 10%. Even if software has an error rate that is 1%, I'm still better off, especially given the additional benefits of more staff time freed up for seeing more patients, faster cash flow, and being able to rely on automated systems that are not calling in sick. So far, the processing quality has been really high and my team loves it, especially because software can be customized to my liking. If you end up working with a software vendor on this, it's definitely worth spending the time up front to customize posting to work exactly how you and your team want.
Yep. Makes sense, right? So what I hear you say is kind of like running this process manually is like a lot of work and not reliable because people come and go. You struggle to find like good people to like do this. By implementing software, even if the error rate is there, it's still like a lot better than the status quo because you're not getting behind. Plus, you see a significant improvement in the quality of the processing of your payments. And with the time freed up, you can actually do the appeals, spend time with the patients. I know you've grown your practice a lot, so I know you put that time back into patient care as well. So for you, it's been a tremendous improvement for running your business. It sounds like. All right. Then lastly, and then we can go to Q&A because I see there are some questions coming in. Do I need to give my team access to my bank account now that I'm using EFTs? Like tell us more about like that.
Yes, fair question. A pro tip I learned along the way is that if you move to EFTs from manual payments, you can just set up a separate EFT bank account that all insurance payments now go into. Software can then securely link your bank account and automatically reconcile EFT transactions against the EOBs entered into the PMS, and it will flag payments that require attention. Even if you don't create a separate bank account, today's software should be able to show your team only the insurance transactions that are relevant for reconciliation and nothing else, without actually giving them credentials.
Yep. So what I take away from this for providers on the call, regardless, try to set up EFTs and ERAs, like set up a separate bank account. Obviously, when you work with a software vendor like Lassie, like we will also take care of that, right? Not only do the ERA enrollments like for you, but also set up the EFT enrollments. And then you don't need team members to go into that bank account because software can be trained to like securely link with that bank account, see if these payments came in, and then automatically reconcile them. And if there are inconsistencies, flag them as tasks for you and your team, which obviously kills two birds with one stone. It's like team members don't see payroll or other sensitive information, which is another earlier point that I think it's good that this industry moves to the highest security standards that like I've worked with in prior healthcare software companies or in fintech companies that I've been part of, and bring these standards like to this this industry as well. All right, with that, before we go to questions, maybe on the next slides, let me thank you, Dr. Kwan. I know you run a thriving practice in Menlo Park, and I really appreciate it that I think on behalf of all of us, you're willing to take some time out of your busy day. It makes a big difference to hear from you, right, on what the impact is on all the rules like that were established and the work that we're doing. Thanks CAQH for being such a gracious host and a great partner in this transition. You all laid the groundwork for vendors and doctors like Dr. Kwan to make this transition to EFTs and ERAs. And for people that are working on the payer side or clearinghouse side on this call, would love to like collaborate with you to close the gap, because I think Dr. Kwan pointed out a few gaps in enrollments, in the data quality. We are processing the payments for a lot of the practices, and we're happy to collaborate with your teams on closing that gap together and moving this industry very quick to a digitized world. So feel free to reach out to us. If you are a provider on the call, I put up a QR code here. If you need help with that transition to EFTs and ERAs or need an automated system to process these payments, happy to see if we can help. Scan the QR code, fill in a few questions about the practice, and my team will reach out to you. And with that, Sarah, like, why don't we move into the Q&A section, because I know some questions came in for the group.
Thank you, Stein. Yes, great presentation. Some great information there. We had a couple questions that came in with the registration.
Yeah.
And as a reminder, as we're discussing these questions, you can still submit questions for our speakers using the Q&A button on your screen. I'll start with one question for you, Taha. Is CORE working on a plan to streamline the EFT and ERA enrollment process?
Yes, so we have, as I mentioned on one of the slides, we actually updated our EFT ERA enrollment rules this past year to really support and increase transparency, the security, and the data set. So we set a maximum set of data that health plans need to be collecting. So to reduce the variability that we've heard around this health plan may require this set of data, another health plan may require another, but to really standardize and bring uniformity across that data set. So as a provider or as a vendor kind of building solutions to this, you're only working with a singular set of data of information that you need to collect. So that way you can support mass enrollments, enroll into 20 different health plans within your network. So we really were thoughtful in our approach to update those rules with emerging business and current business needs in mind.
Thanks, Taha. We had another question come in. This question is for Stein. Can you share the options for automating accounts receivable with ERA?
Yeah, I think like what becomes clear in this call as well, this is all relatively new, right? So I think like now like EFTs and ERAs are getting good enough to start automate like these systems. So I think for starters, like regardless of like automated systems, people should like enroll in EFTs and ERAs, post off the portals. If you don't want to do that in the office anymore and deal with that, like consider outsourced billing agencies that process these payments. The problem with that is obviously there is still a human error rate by people somewhere else doing this like processing like for you. And then there's software like Lassi that we think obviously like is best in class, because what it actually does is fully automatically process these payments, and it can understand adjustments that need to be made and notes that can be written into the right like systems, such that Dr. Kwan's team can actually be hands-off on the hundreds of ERAs that normally need to be touched for 3 to 5 minutes per EOB every week. So like consider using software because that is a fully automated EOB and ERA processing like tool. And it obviously also does the enrollments like for you, because what we just discussed in this call, it's still quite tedious to figure out across all these payers how to set up the EFT and ERA like infrastructure. So like that are kind of the options, like best in class, I'll move regardless to EFTs and ERAs. If you don't want to deal with that in-house, consider an outsourced billing agency. And then there's vendors like us where you can actually fully automate the EFB posting and the reconciliation. And that also then takes care of the EFT ERA enrollment and bank linking, etc.
Thanks, Stein. Okay, I think this is another question for you, Taha. How do I know if I'm able to enroll in EFT ERA with a health plan?
Yeah, good question. So starting with kind of the basics from a policy perspective, EFT and ERA standards are federally required standards through HIPAA and through the Affordable Care Act, and all the operating rules that support EFT and ERA processes are also required for federal adoption and implementation by health plans. So at the basics, all health plans should have the ability to process things via EFT, ERA. And from the perspective is, how do you know if you're able to enroll? CORE definitely has, I mentioned, has a certification program in place. So organizations that have validated and showcased that they've implemented these standards and these rules according to federal guidelines. You can navigate to our website, and there's a list of health plans that have achieved CORE certification on all these payment and electronic remittance operating rules. So one way to validate. Another way is reaching out to us, and we can work with you in identifying those that may be on the list or not.
Thank you, Taha. And we had one other question that came in. I think this is for you, Stein and Dr. Kwan. Why do you think the dental industry is quote unquote behind the medical industry when it comes to efficient practice or care delivery operations?
Great question. I can maybe set the stage, and Dr. Kwan, I think it's very interesting to hear your firsthand experience being on the ground, like with these payments. But The reason why I think we love working with dental practices is that most of the dental practices in the country are like Dr. Kwan. They're independently owned and like mom and pop shops. And take Dr. Kwan's practice, like if he were to set up his own EFTs and ERAs, that is a lot of work to do that. And I'm glad we're working on a standardized EFT and ERA enrollment process, which makes that a lot easier for an individual provider. But currently, like Dr. Kwan has rarely time to run the administration, let alone spend tens of hours figuring out and following up on the EFT and ERA like setup, and figure out how to set it up without paying fees on these transactions. So I think on one hand, for an individual provider, in particular in dentistry, there are a lot of individual providers. It's a lot of time. And then the other part is that nobody really built a software that in a very cost-effective way can then process all these payments. Because obviously, if you set up the ERAs and EFTs, you're not done, because you still need to figure out how to put these payments correctly, make the adjustments, make the notes. So there's an additional couple of minutes per claim to process that ERA by a human right now in a practice. And small practices have hundreds of ERAs every week that they need to like reconcile and post and process. So I think for those two reasons, dentistry has been behind traditionally. And then like we're now making a push together to kind of like get thousands and tens of thousands of providers like on that infrastructure, and then like let software do that in a very cost effective way. But Dr. Kwan, like what do you think? What held you back basically for many years to make this transition?
Yeah, no, yeah, Stein, I think you touched upon it, but Sarah, to answer the question, being a practice owner, you're wearing many different hats. I think primarily, I was most comfortable in terms of seeing patients, and that's how I was trained as a clinician. But then becoming a practice owner, as you wear different hats, you have to prioritize, and oftentimes, patient care just was my priority. But now that as we've been growing, I'm learning that I not only have to work in the practice, in the business, seeing patients, but also on the business as well. And so, yes.
That makes sense.
Thank you. I think there were some questions that Taha had as well come through. Oh, you're on mute, Taha.
So one of the questions that came online is around mass enrollment. So is there a standard software or format available for providers to support bulk, like mass or bulk enrollment capabilities? And I can maybe level set it from a policy operating rule perspective. So in our EFT ERA enrollment data rules, we do have the ability to support bulk enrollment. So we have a maximum set of data elements such as, you know, MPIs, bank account information, and the ability for those data elements to be repeatable, depending on how maybe a vendor may take that and program from a bulk enrollment perspective. But there is some standardization in place now to support bulk or mass enrollment features from a policy perspective. But maybe Stein or Dr. Kwan, maybe from a software perspective, is there anything that you want to add?
I can shine a light at how on the technology side. So like I think we're working towards that together, right? Like I think these new updated rules will like actually like in the coming years like result in the best case scenario in a very easy EFT and ERA enrollment process. I think from the technology perspective, how we solved it in the meantime, because we cannot not enroll people. We just built an internal enrollment system that's now almost like semi-automated. So like we take in a fairly simple form the information from an individual provider, the MPI, the TIN, all the things that we figured out we need, right? Like on behalf of all the other practices to do the enrollments. And then internally, like our engineers build kind of like this semi-automated enrollment like system. So in fact, we internally have built this already, and then just work around kind of like all the individual enrollment processes to get the ERAs and the EFTs. And that is a combination of directly doing that with the payer, doing that to clearinghouses, doing that to vendors, all to give like the best ERAs and EFTs like to the providers, such that software can do the best job then ultimately like reconciling and posting like all these payments. So there isn't a bulk solution for that. I'm pretty optimistic with the rules that we're working on that will come fairly soon. And I think it's an interesting conversation to have together with the payers, because everybody benefits from this, right? Because the amount of administrative work on the payer side, on the provider side, the patient that will benefit from it, it's a no-brainer, I think, for all parties involved. So I think what we should do is like get together and see how we as vendors can closely collaborate like with the payers and with CAQH to kind of like further work towards a bulk enrollment process as soon as possible, because now like it's quite an undertaking, and like Dr. Kwan, I think well is like it's almost undoable for an individual provider to like go to that process and thoroughly follow up on all these enrollments.
Yeah, thank you. Another question came in. So we have found that payer enrollment processes for ERAs to be quite painful and inconsistent across payers. And this person wants to learn more about standard enrollment requirements that all payers must meet. So I can answer this one. To answer your question, our EFT ERA enrollment data rules define a maximum set of data for EFT and ERA enrollment. And within that data set, there's a concept of data element groups. Think of data element groups as categories of information. So one data element group may be provider identifiers, such as NPIs, tax ID numbers, licensure number from your state boards. Another data element group may be financial institution information, so bank account information. If you're changing maybe your bank account information, your previous bank account information, some of those bank account details. Another may be around provider identifiers, so your name, your address, your practice location, your business type. So what we've done is created these concepts of data element groups, and within each of these data element groups, there's sub data elements that align to those. So depending on if it's EFT or ERA, there's a maximum set of data across these groups that health plans are allowed to collect when it's enrolled. And the name, the naming convention, the description, the value set of those are all defined within the rule requirements to try to make it as uniform and standard as possible. So like vendors like LASI or other folks trying to build systems, it's kind of one uniform data set that everyone's working with to support interoperability and uniform data collection and processing requirements. I don't know if Stein or Dr. Kwan, you want to add anything to that? Sorry, before I go, this data set is available publicly on our website. Happy to share a link with everyone, but if you go to our operating rules page and navigate to our payment and remittance operating rules, you'll be able to have access to what that data set is. Over to you, Steiner or Dr. Kwan, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think two observations from the field by doing this transition for thousands of providers. I think it stresses the importance of like the new updated rule requirements. I think this, in particular, the enrollments like interfaces are not standardized, so it's sometimes hard to figure out for a provider like where to go. And then as well, kind of like the notifications on the status of these like EFT and ERA enrollments, like where are they in the process of getting completed. Like in engineering, you would build like a state engine that at all times can tell for an individual provider where you are in that process. So standardizing and aligning on like how we set up notifications and define states and require requirements for timeframes is something where there's currently a huge opportunity to kind of like streamline like this this process. So I think that's yeah, it stresses the importance of what we're doing. And I think that like I'm pretty optimistic that like if we bridge those two gaps, mainly standardizing the interfaces, like where to go for like an EFT and an ERA enrollment, and then secondly, like notifications on the state like of the enrollments, that those two things standardized will allow us to do like get that number down from, if you will, 79% where it is right now, to like 30-20% like over the years to come, because it's mainly like the tediousness of that process that makes it so hard for providers like Dr. Kwan to roll off paper payments.
Thank you, Stein and Dr. Kwan and Taha as well. We're going to wrap things up with a brief call to action. I'm going to be sending this deck out in the next 1 to 2 business days, so you'll have access to all of these links as well. There's information on reaching out to LASI for more about transitioning to EFTs and ERAs, or to learn more about working with them. If you're interested in having your organization join CORE as a participant, please reach out to us at core@caqh.org. We currently have a code combinations task group open to participating organizations. And we also have a market-based review that will be launching on August 26th, which is somehow next week. This process is open to any organization. You can also reach out to us at the core email above for more information. And finally, we will be hosting our second CAQH Connect conference this September in Washington, D.C. We'd love to see you there. The link to register is going to be on this deck and also on our website. And that wraps up our webinar. Again, on behalf of Taha and I and the rest of the core team, we'd like to thank Stein Pelle and Dr. Eric Kwan for their great presentation today. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.